You think you're touching this screen right now, your finger, the glass. Contact, solid matter meeting solid matter. The sensation of pressure, of resistance pushing back. That's touch, right? That's physical contact. Wrong. Your finger has never touched anything in your entire life. Not this screen, not your keyboard, not your coffee mug this morning. Not another person's hand. Nothing, ever. What you call touch is an elaborate illusion. A trick your brain plays because the truth is too strange, too far removed from everyday experience. But here's the thing about truth in physics. It doesn't care if it makes you comfortable. The sensation you're feeling right now isn't contact. It's repulsion. Invisible forces pushing back across empty space. And when you understand what's really happening, when you see through the illusion, everything you think you know about the physical world starts to crumble. Let me show you what I mean. Look at your hand. Seems solid, doesn't it? Flesh and bone, continuous matter. But zoom in. Keep zooming. Past the skin cells, past the molecules, past the atoms themselves. What do you find? Nothing. An atom is almost entirely empty space. The nucleus sits at the center, impossibly small. If you scaled an atom up to the size of a football stadium, the nucleus would be a marble sitting at midfield. The electrons would be specks of dust floating somewhere up in the cheap seats. Everything else, the entire playing field, the stands, the parking lot, empty, void, nothing. Your hand is essentially a cloud of emptiness held together by invisible forces. But here's where it gets strange. If atoms are mostly empty space, if your hand is mostly empty space, why doesn't it pass right through everything else? Why doesn't matter just flow through matter like smoke through air? The answer is going to break everything you think you know about solid objects. When you push down on that desk, when you feel that resistance, you're not feeling solidity in any meaningful sense. You're feeling electromagnetic repulsion. The electrons in your hand are pushing away from the electrons in the desk with tremendous force. The same electrons that are floating in all that empty space around their nuclei. Think about this. Electrons carry negative electric charge. And charges follow one simple rule. Like repels like. Every electron in your hand is desperately trying to get away from every electron in the desk. They push against each other across the void, through that empty space between atoms, with forces so strong you literally cannot comprehend their magnitude. Put two electrons 1 centimeter apart. The electromagnetic force pushing them away from each other is stronger than the gravitational force between them by a factor of 10 to the 42nd power. That's a 1 followed by 42 zeros. Electromagnetic forces make gravity look like a whisper in a hurricane. So why isn't everything exploding? Why doesn't matter tear itself apart under these enormous repulsive forces? Because of balance. Exquisite, perfect balance. Every atom contains both positive charges, protons in the nucleus, and negative charges, electrons in orbit around them. Positive and negative in equal amounts. The repulsive forces between like charges are exactly cancelled by attractive forces between opposite charges. Everything balances to zero. But balance can be disturbed. When you rub a balloon on your hair, you scrape a few electrons off the hair and pile them onto the balloon. Just a tiny excess, maybe 1 electron in every trillion. Almost nothing. But because the underlying forces are so enormous, even this tiny imbalance creates effects you can feel. Hold that balloon near your arm. Your arm hairs stand up, reaching toward the balloon through empty air. You're feeling electromagnetic force acting at a distance. The same force that's operating right now between your finger and this screen, just at a much smaller scale. And here's what should really disturb you. The scale is the only difference. When you touch the screen, electrons in your finger never actually reach electrons in the glass. They get close, very close, a few atomic widths apart. And then the repulsive force becomes so strong that it pushes back. You feel that push as resistance. You feel that push as solidity. But it's not solidity. It's electromagnetic repulsion operating across a gap. You have never touched anything, because touch, in the sense of actual contact, doesn't exist. Every sensation you've ever interpreted as touch is just electromagnetic forces pushing against electromagnetic forces through empty space. But here's where the story gets even stranger. There's another force at play, something called the Pauli exclusion principle. And this is where the universe gets really unforgiving about what can and cannot occupy the same space. Electrons aren't just little charged balls. They have a property called spin, not actual spinning, but a quantum mechanical property that comes in 2 varieties, spin up and spin down. And the universe has one absolute rule. No 2 electrons can exist in the same state at the same time. This isn't just electrons being antisocial. This is a fundamental law, as absolute as the speed of light. as non-negotiable as conservation of energy. The universe simply will not allow it. When the electrons in your hand get too close to the electrons in the screen, when they try to occupy similar quantum states, the Pauli exclusion principle kicks in. It's not just electromagnetic repulsion anymore, it's the universe itself saying no. You feel this as hardness, as the inability to push your hand through solid objects. But what you're really feeling is quantum mechanics enforcing one of its most basic rules. And this is why you can't walk through walls. Not because the wall is solid in some absolute sense, but because the electrons in your body and the electrons in the wall cannot coexist in the same quantum states. The universe forbids it. So every step you take, every object you touch, every sensation of physical contact you've ever experienced, it's all electromagnetic forces and quantum exclusion. Nothing more, nothing less. Your entire tactile experience of reality is empty space, electric charges, and mathematical rules about what quantum states are allowed. Think about what this means for a moment. The hardness of diamond, the softness of silk, the warmth of human skin, none of these are intrinsic properties of solid matter. They're all different expressions of the same electromagnetic interactions, the same quantum rules, playing out across different arrangements of mostly empty space. But here's the part that should really mess with your head. If nothing ever actually touches anything else, how do we move things? How do you pick up a coffee mug? How does a baseball bat hit a ball? The answer is momentum transfer through electromagnetic fields. When the moving electrons in your hand get close to the stationary electrons in the mug, they don't collide like billiard balls. They interact through their electric fields. The moving field pattern of the electrons in your hand disturbs the field pattern around the electrons in the mug. Energy and momentum transfer from one field to another. It's all field interactions. Invisible field patterns influencing other invisible field patterns across empty space. And somehow your brain interprets this as picking up an object. Motion itself is just a choreography of electromagnetic fields dancing around each other without ever making contact, transferring energy and momentum through the void. Now you might be thinking, wait, what about other forces? What about the strong nuclear force holding atomic nuclei together? What about gravity? Here's the thing about scale. The strong nuclear force is incredibly powerful, but it's incredibly short range. It operates only inside atomic nuclei, across distances so small they might as well not exist in your everyday world. Gravity is incredibly long range, but it's incredibly weak. So weak that the electromagnetic forces in a single atom completely overwhelm the gravitational attraction between two people standing right next to each other. For everything you see, everything you feel, everything you interact with in your daily experience, when you sit in a chair, electromagnetic repulsion holds you up. When you walk on the floor, electromagnetic repulsion prevents you from falling through. When you see light, electromagnetic waves are hitting your retina. When your neurons fire, electricity is flowing through your brain. Your entire sensory experience of the physical world is electromagnetic. And electromagnetic forces never involve actual contact, always action at a distance, always repulsion and attraction across empty space. But let's push this even further. If atoms are mostly empty space, if all forces operate at a distance, if nothing ever actually touches anything else, what exactly is solid matter? The answer is going to sound like philosophy, but it's actually physics. Solid matter is a pattern of behavior. Think of a whirlpool in a river. The water that makes up the whirlpool is constantly changing. New water flows in, old water flows out. The whirlpool isn't made of any particular water molecules. It's made of a pattern, a stable configuration that maintains itself over time. Solid matter is like that whirlpool, except instead of water flow, it's electromagnetic field patterns. Stable configurations of electric and magnetic fields that resist being disturbed. When you push on a desk, you're trying to disrupt those field patterns. The patterns push back, trying to maintain their configuration. You feel that pushback as solidity. But there's no stuff there in any fundamental sense. No irreducible, indivisible chunks of matter. Just field patterns, electromagnetic field patterns interacting with other electromagnetic field patterns through empty space. This isn't some abstract theoretical point. This is measurable, testable reality. We can see individual atoms now. We can manipulate them one by one. We can watch electrons tunnel through barriers they shouldn't classically be able to cross. We can measure the tiny gaps between atoms in crystals, gaps that should collapse if contact were actually possible but don't because electromagnetic repulsion won't let them. The evidence is overwhelming. Contact is an illusion. Touch is misinterpreted. Electromagnetic repulsion. Solidity is misinterpreted. Field stability. And here's the beautiful, terrible thing about this truth. It changes everything and nothing simultaneously. Everything changes because you now know what's actually happening. Every handshake is electromagnetic fields influencing electromagnetic fields. Every embrace is patterns of electric charge adjusting to accommodate other patterns of electric charge. Every sensation of warmth or cold or texture is your nervous system interpreting various electromagnetic interactions and translating them into conscious experience. But nothing changes because the illusion is so perfect, so seamlessly constructed, that for practical purposes it doesn't matter. You can still navigate the world as if objects were solid, as if touch were real. The electromagnetic forces are so precisely balanced, so exquisitely fine-tuned, that they create a consistent, reliable approximation of the contact-based reality your intuition expects. But you'll never see it the same way again. Every time you reach for a door handle, every time you feel the ground under your feet, every time you experience the resistance of matter pushing back against your body, you'll know it's empty space all the way down. Fields and forces and quantum rules, but no contact, never contact. But let's dig deeper into this illusion, because the more you examine it, the stranger it becomes. When you walk across a room, you think you're stepping on a solid floor. But what's actually happening is that the electromagnetic fields around the atoms in your shoes are interacting with the electromagnetic fields around the atoms in the floor. These field interactions create a repulsive force that transfers upward momentum to your body. The floor never touches your foot in any meaningful sense. Instead, your foot hovers above the floor at a distance of a few atomic widths, suspended by invisible electromagnetic forces. You're essentially hovering above every surface you've ever walked on, floating on a cushion of electromagnetic repulsion so thin you can't perceive it, so precisely calibrated that it feels like solid contact. And here's something that will really mess with your perception. Different materials feel different, not because they have different solidness, but because they have different electromagnetic field configurations. Steel feels hard because its atoms are arranged in a tight, regular lattice. The electromagnetic fields are densely packed and highly organized. When you press against steel, you're trying to disrupt this orderly field pattern. The pattern resists strongly, creating the sensation of hardness. Rubber feels soft because its molecular chains can flex and rotate. The electromagnetic fields can rearrange themselves more easily. When you press against rubber, the field patterns can deform and flow around the disturbance. You interpret this flexibility as softness, but it's all the same phenomenon, electromagnetic field patterns resisting disruption. The only difference is how organized those patterns are, how easily they can rearrange themselves when disturbed. Temperature works the same way. Hot objects feel hot because their atoms are jiggling more violently. When the rapidly oscillating electromagnetic fields of a hot object interact with the more slowly oscillating fields in your skin, energy transfers from the fast-moving fields to the slower-moving ones. Your nervous system interprets this energy transfer as heat. Cold objects feel cold because their electromagnetic fields are moving more slowly. When your warmer, faster jiggling atomic fields interact with their cooler, slower moving fields, energy flows out of your skin into the object. Your nervous system interprets this energy loss as coldness. But again, no actual contact, just field interactions. Energy and momentum transferring between electromagnetic field patterns across empty space. Even texture is electromagnetic. Smooth surfaces have regular, predictable field patterns. Your skin's electromagnetic fields interact with this regularity in a consistent way, creating the sensation of smoothness. Rough surfaces have irregular field patterns. Your skin encounters constant variations in the electromagnetic interactions, which your brain interprets as roughness. Every tactile sensation you've ever experienced is just your nervous system's interpretation of different electromagnetic field interactions. Every touch, every texture, every sensation of hot or cold or hard or soft, it's all the same underlying phenomenon playing out in different configurations. Now here's where the story takes an even stranger turn. Your brain doesn't just interpret these electromagnetic interactions as touch. It completely reconstructs reality around this interpretation. When you pick up an apple, here's what actually happens. The electromagnetic fields around the atoms in your hand interact with the electromagnetic fields around the atoms in the apple. These field interactions resist relative motion between your hand and the apple. When you move your hand, the apple moves too, not because you're gripping it, but because the electromagnetic field interactions create forces that accelerate the apple along with your hand. Your brain takes these complex electromagnetic interactions and constructs a simple story, I am holding an apple. But that story requires the concept of you as something separate from the electromagnetic fields, an apple as something separate from electromagnetic fields, and holding as some kind of relationship between these separate things. The reality is far stranger. There is no you holding an apple. There are just electromagnetic field patterns interacting with other electromagnetic field patterns in a way that maintains certain spatial relationships. Your sense of being a separate entity manipulating separate objects is a story your brain constructs to make sense of field interactions it cannot directly perceive. But the illusion runs even deeper than that. Consider this. If electromagnetic forces are the only forces you ever feel, if every sensation of push and pull and resistance comes from electromagnetic field interactions, then everything you know about cause and effect, about action and reaction, about how objects move and behave, all of that knowledge is actually knowledge about electromagnetic fields. When you think you understand how a lever works, you actually understand how electromagnetic field patterns around pivot points resist rotational distortion. When you think you understand how wheels reduce friction, you actually understand how rolling contact minimizes electromagnetic field disruption compared to sliding contact. Every principle of mechanics, every engineering insight, every practical technique for manipulating the physical world, it's all really electromagnetic field theory in disguise. Your intuitive physics, built from a lifetime of touching objects and pushing things around, is actually an intuitive understanding of how electromagnetic fields behave under different configurations. And this reveals something profound about human knowledge. We don't really understand the world by learning its fundamental principles. We understand the world by building approximate models that work well enough for our purposes. Your brain's contact-based model of reality is wrong in every detail, but it's useful because electromagnetic forces are so precisely balanced that they create a consistent approximation of contact. But sometimes the approximation breaks down. Sometimes the underlying electromagnetic reality shows through. Static electricity is one example. When you walk across carpet and then touch a doorknob, you experience electromagnetic forces directly. The spark jumps across a visible gap. No contact required. Just charges moving through empty space, exactly as they always do, but this time at a scale large enough for you to perceive the gap. Magnetic levitation is another example. Superconducting magnets can levitate objects in midair with no physical support whatsoever. No hidden wires, no tricks. Just electromagnetic forces pushing against electromagnetic forces across empty space. The levitating object demonstrates what's always happening at the atomic scale, matter suspended in midair by invisible forces. And here's a thought that should really disturb you. If you've never actually touched anything, if all your knowledge of the physical world comes from electromagnetic field interactions, how can you be sure about the existence of anything beyond those interactions? You assume there are atoms out there generating the electromagnetic fields. But all you've ever experienced are the field interactions themselves. You've never experienced an atom directly, only the electromagnetic effects you attribute to atoms. What if the fields are all there is? What if matter is just a convenient fiction, a story you tell to explain patterns in electromagnetic field behavior? This isn't just philosophical speculation. Some interpretations of quantum field theory suggest that particles are just excited states of underlying fields, temporary patterns in the electromagnetic field rather than things that have electromagnetic properties. According to this view, there are no electrons, only patterns in the electron field. No protons, only patterns in the proton field. No atoms, only stable configurations of multiple field patterns that behave in atom-like ways. If this interpretation is correct, then reality is even stranger than we thought. There is no matter at all, just fields. Fields interacting with fields, creating stable patterns that persist over time and resist disruption. Patterns that create the illusion of solid objects made of stuff, when really there's just structured emptiness all the way down. But even if you reject this interpretation, even if you insist that atoms are real things rather than field patterns, the fundamental point remains: you've never made contact with these supposedly real atoms. All your knowledge about atoms comes from electromagnetic field interactions. All your evidence for their existence comes through electromagnetic phenomena. You're always separated from the reality you're trying to understand by layers of electromagnetic interpretation. And this leads to a disturbing question about knowledge itself. How can you ever know what's really out there if all your information comes through electromagnetic field interactions in your nervous system? How can you be sure your brain's interpretation of these interactions bears any resemblance to whatever is generating them? Consider vision. Light electromagnetic radiation hits your retina. This triggers electrochemical signals, more electromagnetic phenomena in your optic nerve. These signals travel to your brain, where they trigger complex patterns of neural activity, again electromagnetic processes. Your brain somehow interprets all this electromagnetic activity as seeing objects in the external world. But you never experience the objects directly. You only experience your brain's interpretation of electromagnetic patterns. What if the interpretation is completely wrong? What if the electromagnetic patterns in your visual cortex correspond to external reality in the same way that a painting of a pipe corresponds to an actual pipe, a useful representation, but fundamentally different from the thing it represents? Touch seemed like the most direct sense, the most reliable way to know what's really there. But if touch is just electromagnetic field interactions, if you never actually contact anything you're trying to touch, then touch is just as indirect as vision, just as interpretive, just as potentially misleading. This doesn't mean external reality doesn't exist. It means you can never know it directly. You can only know your nervous system's electromagnetic interpretation of electromagnetic field interactions that might or might not correspond to something beyond those interactions. And here's the final twist that should completely shatter your confidence in the solidity of the world. Your brain, the thing doing all this interpreting, is itself made of electromagnetic field interactions. Every thought you're having right now is the result of electromagnetic processes in your neural tissue. The neurons firing as you read this are electromagnetic phenomena. The electrochemical signals carrying information around your brain are electromagnetic phenomena. Your memory of what you read in the previous paragraph is stored in electromagnetic field patterns. So you have electromagnetic field patterns in your brain, interpreting electromagnetic field interactions with other electromagnetic field patterns, and calling the result knowledge of the external world. It's electromagnetic fields all the way down and electromagnetic fields all the way up. No solid foundation anywhere. No ultimate ground of contact, of direct experience, of unmediated knowledge. You're essentially a temporary pattern of electromagnetic activity, floating in empty space, interpreting other electromagnetic patterns, and constructing elaborate stories about solid objects and physical contact and touching things. Stories that help you navigate the world successfully but bear no necessary resemblance to what's actually happening. And the strangest part? The story works. This electromagnetic fiction is so consistent, so reliable, so perfectly constructed that you can build bridges with it. You can send people to the moon with it. You can perform surgery with it. You can build computers that process the very electromagnetic signals that constitute your thoughts. The illusion of contact is so seamless that it enables genuine understanding and real technological power, even though it's based on completely false assumptions about what touch and solidity actually are. Which raises the final, most unsettling question of all. If an illusion this fundamental can be this useful, what does that say about the nature of truth itself? If electromagnetic field patterns can create the perfect impression of solid, touchable objects where no such objects exist, what other impressions might be equally convincing and equally false? What else that seems absolutely, obviously, undeniably real might be just another layer of electromagnetic interpretation? And how would you ever know where the illusions end and reality begins when the very brain asking the question is itself just another electromagnetic pattern in the vast, empty, untouchable void?